The time has finally come to feature the Steam Deck in its own video on the channel, and doing it the way I know best with some PlayStation 2 emulation using a combination of EmuDeck and PCSX2. The adored Steam Deck is one handheld that I've wanted to showcase here in some capacity, and so in a slight change of pace and moving away from bestsellers or top-rated games, we will explore 15 overlooked gems and cult classics on the platform and see just how well the Steam Deck does with PS2 emulation using PCSX2. So grab a couple of snacks and join me, the Retro Tech Dad, on another journey exploring the PlayStation 2 library using the beloved Steam Deck from Valve. As I normally do with emulation showcases, I will detail the criteria and settings used on my Steam Deck and for this specific video. Starting things off, if you aren't familiar with EmuDeck, I highly recommend heading over to their website and getting started with it on your Steam Deck. EmuDeck automates and streamlines the entire emulation experience for the Steam Deck, going as far as integrating it into your library, complete with fancy cover art and images so that when you are over in gaming mode, it will feel like it's part of your Steam library. With EmuDeck, PCSX2 is pre-installed and pre-configured for the optimal experience. The only thing you will need to provide is a PS2 BIOS and of course some games. So every game here is running in PCSX2 using version 1.7.3592. We are using the Vulkan backend for all games. I have tested every game running at the default EmuDeck PCSX2 configuration of 720p, which is 2x native resolution. The footage you will see in this video was recorded at 1080p, which is 3x native resolution. It's very easy to change that setting in PCSX2. Now if you're feeling up to it, from gaming mode, head over into desktop mode. From there, use File Manager and navigate to the location where you had EmuDeck installed. On my Steam Deck, I installed it to the micro SD card, so I'll be navigating to my removable devices. Under the Emulation folder, then Tools, and finally the Launchers folder. From there, you can run PCSX2. In the Settings tab and under Graphics, click on the Rendering tab and then you can change the internal resolution to whatever you want to test. As I said earlier, every game featured here today had no issues at 3x native resolution. All the games here are the PAL version running at 50 Hz. Now here's a quick look at the PCSX2 settings that I'm using. These are all left at default. Finally, I will be selecting 15 personal favorites on the PS2 that are either overlooked and forgotten gems or some cult classics for the console. This list will be presented in no particular order, we'll just go with what feels right. Let's start things off with a game that has been featured on my channel before and is very much the PS2's version of Luigi's Mansion with a much more mature aesthetic. Ghosthunter comes to us from the now defunct Studio Cambridge, who was probably best known for the medieval franchise. This will not be the only time Studio Cambridge appears on this list, but for this entry, Ghosthunter can be described as a third-person ghost hunting game and features some particularly impressive graphics for the time. This is a pretty solid game and well worth checking out if you're into ghost hunting and something like Luigi's Mansion on the PS2. So let's talk about the other Studio Cambridge game on my list. Primal released around the same time as Ghosthunter and really proved to me that the studio could put out some high quality cinematic experiences with some of the best graphics on the PS2 combined with awesome voice acting and just an overall great aesthetic. Now as expected from this generation, there is a little jankiness to the controls, but it doesn't really take away from the experience for me. I absolutely loved this game back in the day and it's just as enjoyable today. The main character Jen is very cool and a refreshing change of pace for a female lead at the time, focusing more on her character as someone not only attractive but funny and smart with fantastic voice acting that really brings the character to life. In addition, her sidekick Scree is also fantastic. The soundtrack is awesome as well and just adds to the overall slick aesthetics. I think this game is the perfect example of something that was overlooked at release, underrated with reviewers, and in my opinion, an absolute gem. Now this is the only game on my list that needs a very specific fix to address the emulation issue in-game. Now anytime the game is set to a hardware renderer such as OpenGL or Vulkan, the screen will be black during in-game sequences. So if if you are interested, follow along with me to get this working properly. In order to correct this, you will need to enable cheats in PCSX2. Now, you will need to be in the desktop mode on SteamOS, and from there, you will need to navigate to the home folder using the file manager. Once you are there, make sure that you have Show Hidden Files checked off by clicking on the 3 lines in the top right corner. You should now have the hidden folder that you need visible. So click on the .config folder and head over to the PCSX2 folder and finally cheats. This is the location where you will place the cheat file. You can download this cheat file from the description box down below. I have included both PAL and US cheat files. You can either download the file directly to your Steam Deck by going to this video, or you can download it on a PC and copy it over using a USB drive with your Steam Deck connected to a dock. As always, I am happy to answer any questions at my usual hangout spots on either Reddit, Discord, or right here in the comments section. One last thing, I want to give a shout out to the PCSX2 wiki page, which I will have linked in the description below. This is a very useful resource for troubleshooting any other issues you might encounter with different games running in PCSX2. Now, I can't overstate just how much I love Harmonix and pretty much every one of their games. It just so happens that rhythm games are also a genre that I adore, so it's not a big surprise that Harmonix is a favorite studio of mine. Interestingly, Frequency was really one of the first rhythm games to come out of a studio based in North America, and not the usual releases from Japan. Frequency was essentially Harmonix's first major release, and little did I know they would go on to create some more of my favorite games. With that being said, it's easy to see why Frequency is a special game. The perfect blend of slick visuals, cool music, and addictive gameplay makes Frequency tons of fun to play even today in 2022. In fact, I couldn't put the game down despite needing to record footage of other games. This is still well worth checking out, and it comes highly recommended. By the way, if you're struggling with timing or hitting notes, make sure to check your Steam performance settings in the overlay. The key thing is to turn off any frame rate limits and make sure the screen refresh is set correctly, otherwise you will really struggle to play this one properly. Here comes another fantastic rhythm game on the PlayStation 2. This console was an absolute goldmine when it came to this genre for both the variety and quality of games. Gitaroo Man was no exception to this, and I became an instant fan the first time I played this one, with its really awesome soundtrack. The entire art style is hard to resist as well, and it's just a blast to play. By the way, this game also received a port to the PlayStation Portable. This game literally was a runner-up for GameSpot's annual Best Game No One Played on the PlayStation 2, and really, it's a shame. Nowadays, I like to think there are more people who are aware of this great game, and hopefully this video will encourage some more to give it a shot. The PS2 generation was a really weird time in gaming, with lots of companies experimenting in different ways. The sim racing genre was a perfect example of this, with racing game entries by Capcom, Squaresoft, and for the game being featured today, Konami. Enthusia Professional Racing is a surprisingly decent sim racer and was the first and I believe only time Konami would make a sim racing game. Without a doubt, Gran Turismo 4 stole the spotlight from pretty much any sim racing game on the platform, and everything else really stood no chance against it. Now, the meat and potatoes of the game is in the Enthusia Life mode that has some interesting takes on the typical career mode. Given that this was their first attempt at a sim racer, Konami did a fine job. I really recommend giving this one a shot and trying something different from Gran Turismo. This next one is so much fun. Blood Will Tell, or Dororo as it's known in Japan, was released by Sega way back in 2004. Now, this game is based on the Japanese manga series of the same name, and the main premise revolves around the protagonist Hyakumaru, who had his body parts stolen by 48 fiends, and so throughout the game you're on a quest to defeat them and get your body parts back. It's a very unique premise and lends itself quite well to a video game. This is a fairly competent hack and slash game with some of the jankiness from the 6th generation, like the top tier voice acting, but this is definitely one that deserves some of your time, and for fans of similar games in the genre, it's a fun game to play through. By the way, the game isn't always in black and white, but I'll just leave it at that. It seems appropriate to follow up with this next entry, and Way of the Samurai from Choir is the first in the series, taking place in 19th century Japan. You play as a Ronin, and the game focuses heavily on combat with tons of swords that are available at your disposal. I really enjoy the combat in this game, and despite being the first entry, it still holds up quite well today. The other surprising aspect of this game for me is just how open-ended it is, and given the original release date was definitely a nice change of pace from the typical linear experiences. For fans of games like Bushido Blade, this one is definitely worth checking out, and I promise if you stick with it, you will be rewarded greatly. Now, in a change of pace, I didn't start this video featuring a shmup. However, it wouldn't be an emulation showcase without some kind of shmup, and I think Silpheed is one that doesn't get much recognition on the platform. I think when it comes to the PS2, we usually think of games like Gradius 5 and R-Type Final, and so I'll give Silpheed the nod here, which was co-developed by the legendary Treasure and Game Arts. The North American version was localized by the very awesome Working Designs. This was actually a very early release on the PlayStation 2, so it's not surprising that many probably never played it or heard of it. I will say that the 3x native resolution really cleans up the visuals for this game, since it never looked anywhere near as good on the original hardware, and this is why emulation is so awesome. Silpheed is a fairly solid shmup and well worth playing through for fans of the genre. Extermination was considered the first survival horror game on the PS2, and it was a surprisingly competent game, being a PS2 exclusive published by Sony, and essentially has not been on any platform since then. I guess it's fair to say that this one is long forgotten, being outshadowed by games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil on the PS2. There are things that this game does well, and I found the controls an improvement for the genre coming from the PS1 era survival horror games. However, it definitely has some of that 6th generation jankiness, namely when it comes to the voice acting and some of the gameplay elements. Out of all the entries on this list, I'd say this is my least favorite title, but I thought it was worth giving a mention as it doesn't seem to be talked about all that much. If you are a fan of the survival horror genre, try this one out for something different. Here's another interesting game and was kind of a surprise for me. The Warriors, which is based on the 1979 movie and comes to us from Rockstar Games, is a 3D beat-em-up set in New York City. This was originally released for the PS2 and Xbox and then saw a port to the PlayStation Portable and later would receive PSN releases on the PlayStation 3 and 4. The most surprising thing was that the Warriors ended up being a very solid and fun game based on a licensed property. The game had very high production values with some of the original cast returning to voice their characters, as well as featuring an incredible soundtrack. As a fan of beat-em-up games, this one had very deep gameplay and the fights really felt satisfying. The story and the overall setting really makes this one stand out from a lot of the others in the genre and makes it well worth checking out. Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monk is a pretty interesting game in that it was a spin-off of the mainline Mortal Kombat game and is not a standard fighting game. At the time, I was definitely pessimistic about this one, given how some of the other Mortal Kombat spin-offs ended up turning out. But I am really happy to say that this one is an absolute blast. As the title suggests, the game focuses on Shaolin monks, Liu Kang, and Kung Lao in a beat-em-up style game and does a great job taking Mortal Kombat into a more action-adventure style gameplay. The game features a pretty solid co-op mode as well, so you can have a friend join in on the action. And of course, this game features a lot of the things that the Mortal Kombat series is known for, such as fatalities. All in all, this one comes together very nicely and is definitely recommended and probably one of my favorites on the list. Okay, so this is a really weird one. The Sword of Etheria, or Oz as it's known in Japan, is essentially the Wizard of Oz if it were an over-the-top anime, and ironically ends up feeling nothing like The Wizard of Oz. By the way, this game was never released in North America, but managed to get a full localization for the PAL territories. The game was developed by Konami, and is basically a 3D hack and slash with members of the development team having worked on other Konami properties such as Castlevania. In fact, the game throws references to lots of other Konami games such as Castlevania and Silent Hill. It's not the most compelling or deep game, but I find it fun to play despite its weaknesses. I think fans of the hack and slash genre will enjoy this one, especially if you've already played through more popular games like Devil May Cry. Disaster Report, or SOS The Final Escape as it's known in the PAL territories, is another game with a really cool premise and is a great example of why I love the PS2 so much. The console saw so many unique titles, and obviously Disaster Report was a very interesting concept. This is a survival action-adventure game where you must work your way through the aftermath of an earthquake that has struck and escaped the island. Throughout the game, you will have to deal with debris, falling buildings, and aftershocks. The series is still around, with 3 additional sequels available, with one more on the PS2, another on the PSP, and more recently the 4th game, which was released on PS4, Switch, and PC. Darkwatch is making a return to this channel, and the last time I featured it was in my GPD XP Plus PS2 showcase. Unsurprisingly, the Steam Deck can handle this one even better than the GPD XP Plus did, and so it's one worth revisiting because it's a great first-person shooter game developed by High Moon Studios and published by Capcom. If you're not aware, this is a cool Western-style first-person shooter, and the main character, Jericho Cross, is a vampire, which lends to an interesting combination of genres. I really love revisiting this one, and it's a shame that the sequel was cancelled and this franchise essentially died with the 6th generation of consoles. Finally, rounding out this list with Shadow of Rome, which is a great entry from Capcom, and because of poor sales, they have not continued this franchise or revisited it in any capacity. In fact, there were plans to release a sequel, but it ultimately became Dead Rising, which obviously saw greater success. Anyways, Shadow of Rome is a really solid action-adventure game that takes place, as the title suggests, in ancient Rome. You play as 2 different characters with an emphasis on different gameplay styles, and I definitely prefer the segments where you play as Agrippa. The fighting is not overly complex, but I find it satisfying, and it's pretty brutal being able to sever limbs and heads. I mean, you can pick up your opponent's severed arm and then proceed to beat them with it. All in all, it's an interesting game with a neat premise for the story and decent gameplay. I think fans of ancient Rome and all that goes with it will enjoy this one. I have to say I had a lot of fun starting to explore PS2 emulation on the Steam Deck. I'm really glad that I was able to showcase some of the capabilities of the Steam Deck on this channel. It's obviously not a secret, but the Steam Deck is probably one of the best performance to price values you'll find on the market, and its capabilities are hard to match at its starting price point. There will definitely be more Steam Deck videos to come in the future, and I'm trying to think about different and interesting ways that I can feature it and showcase games on it that would be a little different from other channels. Please let me know what you might want to see in the future, and what do you think about the games featured here today? What are some of your favorite hidden gems on the PlayStation 2? As always, please comment down below, as I really enjoy reading everyone's comments and engaging with the community. This is the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.